Hi, everyone. This is Tori Vandelin with Prevent Connect. The podcast you're about to listen to is a continuation of my conversation with fellow Prevent Connect staff Ashley Klein Jimenez and David Lee. I asked Ashley and David to reflect on the past year and provide insight into their hopes for sexual and intimate partner violence prevention in 2022. David, I heard you go into it a little bit, and I'm wondering if we can dive a little bit deeper and talk a little bit more. I heard you talk about some of the things that you've seen in the last year regarding social justice, equity, racial justice that have given you a lot of hope and inspiration. But I'm wondering for both of you, what have you learned about or witnessed in the past year that gives you hope and inspiration for sexual and intimate partner violence prevention?
I personally thought that the prevention track at the National Sexual Assault Conference was really hopeful and inspirational this year. It featured organizations and prevention practitioners starting to look at how their own practices and policies contribute to inequities and environments that really don't support the types of communities that we want to see. And, I think that can be really tough to do, but it's necessary if we're really going to make changes. And so I thought that was, while it was, not necessarily something new, I thought that the way that these conversations were happening were very honest and really tied to action. And calls to action for other organizations and prevention practitioners. So I thought that was exciting. David, what about you?
Well, for me, I'm always excited about thinking about who those new partners are and who those new actors are who are working to take efforts towards preventing sexual and domestic violence. Because I don't think we can prevent this just having people who work in sexual and domestic violence field themselves, that we need to have other players. And what I'm doing is I'm seeing it. So the one that strikes me is I'm looking at faith communities and what faith communities are doing. Here in California, we, at Valor, we were able to work with the California Department of Public Health, where there was some funding available, and we supported 21 community organizations do prevention during a pandemic. And a lot of these were many of them were faith groups. And so there was the Sikh Family Services that was doing community outreach and education around domestic violence within the faith community, within their Sikh community, and how they could come up with solutions amongst each other. I saw a group like Shalom Bayit, which is a Jewish group that's been doing work. And right now they're doing their Hanukkah candles each night about actions about how we can work to create a culture free, a culture free from the sexual and domestic violence within our community. I just saw this Sojourners has put together this incredible list called 100 Sermons Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, where they started collecting sermons that were giving, and they wanted to get 100, and they ended up with, in a year, and they ended up with 150 after 6 months. So though the website still says 100 sermons, but I know they've got more. So I'm seeing these communities standing up. And so I'm sort of inspired as I'm seeing people that are taking this on, because that's part of what they see in their community and how they can move forward. In the same way, I'm inspired when I see the people from the sport community being able to take action and speak up and raise I know Tori and I have had a chance to work with, the filmmakers from Roll Red Roll and developing a guide, and working with Coach V and developing that guide. And I know, Tori, you did great work on working in developing that tool. And so I see sport, and I think of the work that Reliance has done in being able to look at sport and moving forward. And I look at, at Valor, we've done a lot of work with different unions and looking at janitorial workers and training peer leaders within janitorial workers who can take a stand in being able to prevent the rape on the night shift that they face. And that there's just so many of the more sectors that we involve, the more That's where I have the hope. And in this pandemic, what I'm seeing is people are standing up because they're seeing this is happening in our communities and knowing that they have to take action.
Thank you, David, for that shout out. I had a moment where I was like, there's no way that web conference was this year. And yep, it was. Feels like it was so long ago, but that Roll Red Roll web conference was February of this year. I cannot believe it. And Ashley, what you had said too about NSAC, I felt like NSAC this year was so special and so inspiring and motivating. It really felt like an opportunity for folks to live into their values and to align their values with sexual violence prevention. So that was a really special moment. And David, you were mentioning faith communities who have been preventing sexual violence. And again, for our listeners, all the resources we talk about will be posted on our website, where you can find more information about this podcast, and that will be linked across all the platforms where you may be listening to this podcast. But back to the faith communities, David, I know Prevent Connect, we had an opportunity to do a special web conference series about preventing sexual violence during COVID-19 in partnership with our colleagues at the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And one of them, it was a Prevent Connect first, where we offered a web conference in Spanish with English interpretation. And on that web conference, one of the guests was Pastor Benjamin Ortega, and he had talked a lot about how he goes about preventing sexual violence within his faith community, and what other faith communities can do to prevent sexual violence. So it has been really inspiring to see, both at NSAC, the way that people are really thinking comprehensively and holistically about sexual violence prevention. And like David had said, all the new partners that have come into sexual violence prevention too. It's really great to see that change. So since we've been talking about what's been hopeful and inspirational in the last year, I want to switch a little bit and start thinking about the future. What are your hopes for sexual and intimate partner violence prevention in 2022?
I wish I could say this is the year we'll just prevent it all, but I know it's a longer process than that.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think, one thing that is kind of always my hope is that that prevention, like stories and conversations and strategies and approaches become more accessible and more of like a mainstream conversation. I think back, Tori, to the end of last year, when we did a web conference trying to like take out all the jargon of prevention speak that happens so often, in our field. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just hope that like we can continue to, there's so many amazing partnerships. Like David, you gave us so many fabulous examples. And sometimes I think that like we do a disservice not being able to like speak in terms that like anyone can understand. Tori, I know you and I always talk about like trying to explain to our families what we do and what we mean by prevention. And so that's just, I hope that we get closer to that we kind of work ourselves out of this corner that we've backed ourselves into a little bit when it comes to language.
I think that the language is important, but I just think we've opened so many of there's so many of these opportunities that have come forward around it. And, I'm with you. I want people to see prevention as being the solution to sexual violence and intimate partner violence. And that I think that, and I've seen that change happen over the last several years, that people are starting to think more about these prevention pieces and how do we stop it from happening in the first place. And we're still, as a society, it's easier to talk about how to respond to it. And we need to respond to it. And it's essential to meet the needs of survivors and to make sure that we help support the healing. But part of that healing is also changing the conditions of which this takes place in the first place and changing it so it's not going to be happening. And what I want to do, I mean, I've always wanted to, I want the big Hollywood movie to be about doing prevention work. I don't know what that movie would be, but that's what I want to see, is find a way to do that language. But my other hope is kind of the same hope for everyone, whether it's in prevention or not. It's that as we start to learn dealing with this pandemic, and as things change with it, and as we're re-engaging in communities, that we get opportunities for people to be able to be together with people, not just virtually, but in person, to be able to do that safely, and to be able to find ways to really relish the gifts we have when communities are able to come together. And then let's also draw on the lessons learned on how to use technology to strengthen what we've done, not to replace it, because I don't want to stop gathering with people in person, but I want to find ways to come up with that mix. I was saying, when Prevent Connect started almost 17 years ago, we were one of the first people that did web conferences, and people weren't going to web conferences in those days. And I remember talking to people thinking, oh, it will never happen. People won't go to trainings online. And now that's, of course, our lives. But I want to figure out that mix of how do we engage with people and learn these lessons, because I think, these last year and a half has been pretty, profound. Obviously, it's been very profound. I don't know what the future will be, but I know that we can learn, and we can, as we get back together with groups of people and find ways to do that safely, that we can to build new things together and really work on creating new changes in our society.
I love those hopes. Thanks for sharing those, David.
Yeah, I feel like both of you really, highlighted a lot of the hopes that I have. Ashley, I am going to make it my goal that next in-person gathering with the family, I am going to describe what I do in ways that make sense. And if they don't, then I'm going to ask them, how can I make it make sense? I feel like that web conference that we did, and then we did it again January of this year with Spanish translation, I just felt like that was it was a great professional development opportunity for me to really think about how do I break that jargon habit. And then David, with everything you had shared about, seeing prevention as the solution, what would it look like for a Hollywood movie to focus on preventing sexual and intimate partner violence? I think that's so powerful. And I think that relates a lot to what you had said earlier in our conversation about interrogating our relationship with the criminal justice system and seeking prevention outside of a criminalization lens. And I also, we've learned a lot in the last, over a year and a half in climbing about the importance of being together and the importance of making accessible online interactions too. It's been really inspiring to see the new apps and the new ways that people are engaging with each other online and socially distanced when they can't engage with each other the way that we were in like 2019. The ingenuity there has brought me a lot of hope. So we are just about at the end of our time together for today's podcast, but before we go, I want to thank you both for being open to this conversation and letting me ask you a whole bunch of questions. I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate that throughout our conversation, you both have been really, really generous with providing resources for our audience, kind of as next steps for folks to check out. Are there any resources you want our audience to know about to help them start off 2022 on the right prevention foot?
Well, is this a trick question? Because I feel like I'm just going to say all of the Prevent Connect stuff. But seriously, I think I'm really proud of the conversations that we've brought to Prevent Connect, over the last 17 years, but over the last 2 years especially. And so I love that we record everything and have great blogs. Tori, so many that you've written over the last year, I go back to again and again. But I think so there's actually an upcoming resource that I'm really excited about. And I think it would be a great way to kind of kick off a new year on the right prevention foot, as you said. And so that is our web conference that we have next week that will be highlighting international prevention programs and strategies, and really helping us here in the U.S. think more expansively and look at how work happening globally can inform the work that preventionists are doing in the U.S. So I think at the time of this recording, we are officially sold out and we have a wait list set for that, but of course we'll record it. And I know that I'll probably go back and listen to it, even though I'll be a part of it, because I think there will just be a lot to kind of take in and think about.
Well, I'm going to join the theme of what are the new resources that we think are coming and that are coming. And so there's a few things. One is that there might be more money coming. In the current Violence Against Women Act, which is, passed the House and waiting to get going in the Senate, there's significant increases to prevention efforts, whether it's going to be the rape prevention education program or the domestic violence prevention program of Delta. And so there's a possibility there's going to be more money available and more resources. In California, this year, the California legislature allocated $15 million to prevention. And so soon we're going to be seeing that money is going to be available for community organizations to be able to do prevention. And I know that this is efforts that are going on throughout the country where people know that making investments in prevention can make a difference, and we're starting to see more of that. And so that's something that I'm really excited about, and seeing those types of funding. And just another one is, I know that in 2022 there's going to be a new toolkit on situational prevention in college campuses. That this was done, some work that Dr. Keith Kaufman had put together, and they're going to be working with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center and releasing that product in 2022. So I suspect you will hear more from us about that. This complements a situational prevention package that I helped put together, looking on college campuses, looking at some mapping strategies. And there's been a really exciting project going on at Johns Hopkins University that now has funding to do some research on hotspot mapping to do prevention of sexual violence. So I'm excited that people are taking action, people are working in their communities, that we're investing in the research to be able to look at the efficacy of these programs, and we are not just learning, but we're learning while we're doing. And that's what's so exciting about our prevention community, is that we do great work and we learn from each other and we learn from our own experiences so we can build more.
Yes, the community aspect about this work, the working within communities and the work itself being a learning community, has been just such an incredible experience and very inspiring for the future. And David, I heard you mention the situational prevention work, and I remember we did a web conference on that, I think 2 years ago at this point. So that's really exciting to hear, how that work is moving forward. And Ashley, maybe that was a trick question for folks to continue engaging with Prevent Connect into 2022 and beyond. We are so excited to have you as part of our Prevent Connect community, and we hope that you join us in the new year. And before we sign off, just wanted to again extend a huge thank you to Ashley and David for being part of this podcast, providing your insights, your resources, your hopes, your inspirations. This has definitely lifted me, lifted my spirits, and left me feeling really excited about prevention in the new year. So thank you both so much.
Thank you to our audience for listening.
Great. I look forward to the three of us getting in a room together someday. We've only been in virtual rooms for a year and a half, but soon in 2022.
Someday. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe to Prevent Connect podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information about our podcasts, visit our website at preventconnect.org/podcast.